Hello, welcome to X Sterling and Sons Writing Emporium, home of literally hundreds of the finest writing machines ever crafted by man, in addition to a rather impressive collection of pens, quills, various writing instruments, as well as parchment. Everything you need to write. How may I help you this evening? You're looking to acquire a typewriter. Well, I dare say, my friend, you're in the correct place. A few quick questions, if you don't mind, before we get into the selection and shopping process. Typewriters were produced for over a century, from the late 1870s through to the early 1980s. So you have to imagine a variety of makes, models, qualities, and purposes were produced. Devices with varying purposes. For example, this Underwood that you see before you is an absolutely stunning example, a marriage of some of the more practical aspects of the later, more modern typewriters, while still having the artistic flair and conscientious design of some of the earlier typewriting models. However, though this model would be excellent for decorative or occasional use, if you're looking to use your typewriter daily or for more rigorous writing activities, this would probably not fit your needs. You would need a more modern typewriter, I believe. So, how will you be using your typewriter? You're a poet. Wonderful. We get many writers, but not overly many poets. So it is wonderful to, see that we're reaching a broader market. So I'm assuming that you'll be writing daily then. Wonderful. So a bit of a sturdier, more reliable model is what you'll be needing, I imagine. Perfect. Yes, we have, as I said, hundreds and hundreds of machines, and I can think of at least 5 or 6 right off the top of my head that are going to be suitable to your needs. Is this going to be your first experience with a typewriter? First time using a typewriter at all? Wonderful. The solitude and focus that you experience and that you will experience when you first sit down to write meaningfully on a typewriter is unparalleled. I envy you being able to experience it for the first time, but it is my incredible pleasure to be able to kind of confer this experience upon you. Modern writing machines, home computing systems, and even to a lesser extent word processors, as they became more and more connected to the internet, to each other, more and more distractions crept in to the purpose of writing. And I think you'll find it extremely refreshing to be able to sit down at a machine with single-minded determination, a conscious decision to write. It's not as common as you think anymore, with email notifications popping up, news notifications. To sit down at a typewriter is to sit down to write. And I think it will be a very valuable experience for yourself, especially being a poet. So in tune with your emotions, I think the calm, the still, will really allow you to access some of your writing talent. But listen to me ramble on. Before we get into the shopping and selection process, since this is your first typewriter, if you don't mind, I believe a brief history will help you really appreciate just how significant these machines were and are to the foundation of the modern industrial world. They're so elegant and so simple, they put ink onto paper. It is very easy to forget just how meaningful and just how significant the invention of the typewriter was. So if you don't mind, it'll just take a few moments. In that case, I invite you to take a journey with me to the year 1866, where Peter Mitterhofer, an Austrian, invented the typewriter. Unfortunately, his invention was never brought to mass market, and indeed it was never really made to be as practical to produce as the person who we're going to talk about next. So, unfortunately, until very recently, he was totally obscured by the father of the modern typewriter, an American named Christopher Sholes. Sholes did not produce the first typewriter, but he produced the first typewriter that would be mass-produced and mass-marketed. He lived in New York, and in 1868, about 2 years after Peter Mitterhofer's invention, he produced the Sholes Standard prototype. Now, he would spend the next 5 years perfecting his design before he would sell it to Remington, an arms manufacturer, in the spring of 1873. You might be wondering, why an arms manufacturer? And in order to appreciate why that was in fact the only option, you'll have to consider the context that surrounded the invention of the typewriter. There was no home appliance market, and there were really no comparable machines to the typewriter at the time, mostly because the invention of household electricity, and indeed even the invention of the light bulb, would not occur for 5 to 10 years, depending on which invention we're referring to. So the only industry that had the knowledge to produce such an intricate, complex, and meticulous machine as the typewriter, and indeed the only industry that had the knowledge to source and then the tools to machine all of the parts, was the arms industry. And if you study beyond the brief history that I'm giving you now, you'll find that in fact several arms manufacturers would get into the typewriting business. So either through acquisitions or people selling their prototypes to them, as happened with Christopher Sholes. In 1875, Remington would produce the first mass-produced and mass-marketed typewriter, the Remington Standard 2, or the Sholes 2, depending on who you were marketing to. And the rest, as they say, is history. One thing you will notice, Christopher Sholes designed a typewriter that is very much in line with the Underwood that you see before you. This machine was produced in 1930, so almost 50 years after Sholes' first prototype. Yet, the design philosophy is virtually identical. The Underwood is obviously kind of the epitome of the modern typewriter. With the upright carriage, the real ribbon system, and the, bank of keys that you see before you. The QWERTY keyboard, interestingly, has been married to the concept of the typewriter since the very beginning, because it was invented by Christopher Sholes. So, if you've ever wondered why all modern keyboards, even home computing keyboards, use the QWERTY keyboard system, it is because Mr. Christopher Sholes designed it that way. Now, Remington did not experience a whole lot of initial success, and this opened the door for dozens, if not hundreds, of opportunistic young inventors who were ambitious and looking to perfect and improve Remington's design, which is why we just have so many brands. The Underwood, Smith Corona, Salt Standard. All of them were seeking to race to the top to provide the ideal consumer writing machine. That isn't to say, however, that all machines look like the one you see before you, indeed the standard that Remington set. Many designs were creative, and many were just downright outlandish. One of my favorite examples is the ball typewriter, which was quite literally a ball that had keys on top of it that you would press in order to stamp the paper. You have to imagine not the most intuitive design to use from a finger positioning standpoint. But unfortunately, in the 1980s and 1990s, a sad chapter of typewriting history occurs. The invention of the home computer completely supplanted and thrust into obscurity and obsolescence the modern typewriter. When you could edit your document in a word processing program, didn't have to purchase ink, and in general you were able to experience a easier writing experience. Nobody really wanted typewriters anymore. Though this is a sad chapter, it is not the final chapter of the typewriting history. As I mentioned to you, typewriters have experienced a bit of a resurgence in popularity, certainly enough to warrant opening up a shop to sell them, as well as repair them, of course. Now, thank you for enduring my little history lesson. I hope you appreciate just kind of how significant this machine was. It shaped the modern world from the late 1870s all the way through to the 1980s. It was really the only machine that you could use to type out a document, to have it be uniform, to have it be standardized. Sure, the printing press was for books, but if you wanted to produce a letter that wasn't completely chicken scratch, as my handwriting unfortunately is, you had to turn to the typewriter. Now, I mentioned before that the typewriting design philosophy kind of changed from one era to the next, and this is very true. This design, the Underwood, this would have cost probably over $100 or so in 1930, which is well over $1,000 in today's currency. And a lot of what you're paying for is the sheer bulk and size of the machine, which of course lends itself to some of the more elegant design choices. Now, unfortunately, large, bulky, intricate designs were not adored by all customers, and indeed, as the century waned on, the designs became increasingly smaller and more compact, sought to use the space and the weight of the materials much more effectively. And by the end, there was quite a bit of plastic incorporated into the design. This model features no plastic whatsoever, which plastic is a bit of a double-edged sword. It certainly made the machines lighter, and to an extent made certain aspects of the machine more durable. However, plastic doesn't age quite as well as metal and glass, so there was certainly a trade-off. But again, I'm rambling. Let us explore some of the typewriting options that we have available for you, shall we? I have a number of typewriters in mind that I think you'll find very attractive. I'm going to start you off with some of the earlier models from the 1930s and 40s, and then we'll move to some of the later models from the 1960s and 70s, even perhaps into the early 80s, just to give you a good feel for what user experience and what amenities each decade has to offer, as well as how they can help you in your writing journey, of course, which is our primary objective. So, without further ado, allow me to first introduce to you the Remington Noiseless Model Number 7. The Remington Noiseless Model Number 7 was billed as the quietest writing machine you will ever use, and indeed it does live up to that moniker by typewriting standards. It's certainly not as aggressive or sharp with the writing mechanism, and the typing is considerably smoother than some of its contemporaries. That being said, you will notice it is a very subdued, very focused and practical design. It's considerably smaller than the Underwood, which I showed you in the beginning. It also lacks some of the aesthetic appeal sacrificed for being quite portable. This model in fact comes with a carrying case, as well as the owner's manual and maintenance instructions that we provide with each and every model that is purchased from us. No bells and whistles are really provided with this model. The keys, as you can see, are plastic, which reduces the weight significantly. It somewhat limits the, as I previously mentioned, aesthetic appeal of the design. The carriage is also not quite as wide as some of the other models, which I'll be showing you, which doesn't quite allow for some of the flexibility with the margins. How are you finding the Remington Noiseless? Not quite your cup of tea. No, that's perfectly alright. Let's move to one of its contemporaries, shall we? This is the Royal Companion. The Royal Companion was produced, we believe, in about the 1940s. Royal had a bit of a trouble naming and attributing its designs, so it's difficult to pinpoint exactly when it was produced, but this model is in keeping with the design that they would use and produce throughout the 1940s. As you can see, this is certainly a step up from the Remington. It has metal and glass keys, the classic design, as well as various chrome and aesthetic decals that really make the design pop. It is a little bit larger and a little bit heavier than the Remington, but it is still extraordinarily portable, and it really just provides that little bit of luxury from a portable model that will really help you kind of settle into the writing process. I think that this would be an excellent choice if you're going to go for a portable over a desktop model. How are you finding the Royal? A little too small. That's no problem at all. In that case, we're going to take a trip from the 1930s and 40s over to the 60s and 70s. Allow me to introduce to you the Smith Corona Galaxy 12. Now, right off the bat, you're going to notice some pretty significant design philosophy changes. This is certainly a much larger and wider design, but this is because there are significantly more keys than was present in the Remington and Royal models. These keys, tabs, half spaces, pluses, minus, numbers, really contribute to the overall flexibility of this design, and indeed it is very, very versatile. The width of the machine also allows for various paper sizes to be utilized with the carriage, so it's a little bit more flexible from that standpoint, and it's really not considerably heavier than the other models. The cast metal of the previous designs, the Remington and the Royal, has been replaced largely with plastic, as well as some sheet metal. That significantly reduces the weight. As I mentioned, this design is from the 1970s, and it certainly shows with the color palette that has been chosen, but that is worth noting. There is a little bit of color kind of injected into the design, which is certainly a pretty stark difference from the Remington and Royal, which were fastidiously black. How are we finding the Smith Corona? Definitely a contender. Excellent. In that case, I'd like to show you a very close cousin of the Smith Corona, a tad bit earlier design, but you'll know what I mean when I say very close cousin. This is the Sears Forecast 12. Now, you may be thinking, wait just a moment. Sears was a popular retailer, but I don't believe that it ever produced typewriters. And in fact, you would be very, very correct. Sears never produced typewriters, but they did commission Smith Corona to produce their Sears line of typewriters, which is why this model and the Galaxy 12 are so incredibly similar. A few things you will notice, however. In comparison to the Galaxy 12, the Forecast is certainly a bit more subdued in its design. The Galaxy 12 had a number of different textures that it was providing, as well as it's just a little bit more luxurious of a design choice. However, the Forecast really outdoes the Galaxy in terms of versatility. It has a number of tools and features that allow it to change fonts, for example, as well as just meet the consumer a little bit, meet the consumer's needs a little bit more than the Smith Corona did. Interestingly, the Forecast is actually from the 1960s, so roughly 10 years before the Galaxy 12 would be produced. How are you liking the Forecast? Not quite as much as the Galaxy. That's alright. I believe I have one final typewriter that I would like to show you that I think you will really, really enjoy. This is the Royal Standard typewriter. It is a large desktop model that has all of the keys and features of some of the later 60s and 70s models, while still keeping in mind the subdued, very industrious design choices of the 30s and 40s. And indeed, this design is from the 1930s, mid-1930s. It is incredibly sturdy and actually the largest out of all of the typewriters that I've shown you. It has a very considerable carriage that allows it to process a variety of margin sizes as well as paper sizes, and it has just about as many keys and features as the late Galaxy 12 model, while still featuring the glass and chrome decals of the other Remington and Royal models. This is a very impressive typewriter, and I certainly believe that if anything were to suit your needs, this would be, if anything were to suit your needs perfectly, this would be the typewriter. It melds the old world design with the new age practicality in terms of typewriters, and it really just has a very signature style that I believe matches your intent and your desire quite well, if you don't mind my saying. How do you find the Royal Standard? I thought so. Yes. Wonderful. I'm very glad that we were able to find something that I see that it's met your standards. I hope that it has exceeded them, because this is truly a one-of-a-kind, excellent machine that is in fantastic condition and really will serve you very, very well for many, many decades. Not just years, decades. These machines were built to last. Now, why don't we take this up to the desk, and I'll give you a little bit more information before sending you on your way. Wonderful. Just one moment, please. Hello again. This is a wonderful machine you've picked out, and I really think that this is going to meet and exceed all of your needs and standards. I wouldn't be a proper salesman, however, if I didn't mention a couple of the features that we offer with each and every one of our machines. One, of course, we'll be sending you out with brand new ribbon, and of course we'll freshly grease and oil the necessary mechanics, all free of charge. We also offer lifetime maintenance, so if one of the keys is sticking or the carriage isn't quite setting where it needs to be, or perhaps one of the internal mechanisms has come loose, although this is certainly a rare occurrence for typewriters of this make and model, we will repair it for a highly reduced rate in comparison to that which we would charge walk-ins. You're part of the family now, and we want to treat you as such. Additionally, we will also provide you with the previously mentioned owner's manual, as well as a pamphlet with some tips and tricks to maintenance. Two things that I want to mention before sending you on your way with your new writing machine. Typewriters in general should be stored covered. This model does not feature the portability that some of the others do, so it doesn't have a carrying case, but a light cloth over it will do just fine. Dust tends to dry up the grease, as well as any moisture in the air will contribute to premature rusting of some of the internal components, and we certainly want to avoid that as much as possible. So just draping a light cloth over it will really help to reduce that process from occurring. Second, we will, of course, as I mentioned, be sending you out with a fresh spool of ribbon, but I would keep in mind, checking the ribbon, not necessarily after every writing session, but if you're going to be writing daily, perhaps at the end of each week. If you're going to be writing quite a lot, I would recommend purchasing ribbon in bulk. We can certainly direct you to some of our suppliers, and I would take careful note of the size and the nature of the spool. You certainly don't want to purchase 50 or so spools in bulk and then find out that you've purchased the wrong size. So please take careful note of that, and just check occasionally to make sure that the ribbon hasn't run out, because that will certainly put an end to your writing escapades, perhaps prematurely. And we don't want you to run out of ribbon mid-keystroke. With that, please, of course, do look over our maintenance guide, but those are the foundational principles of basic typewriter maintenance, and I feel very confident that you're a person of great care and conscientious decisions that will provide the necessary and proper care when you're using your typewriter. Thank you so much for stopping in today. We truly do value each and every one of our customers, and we like to kind of welcome you to the typewriting family. I assure you, you will not be disappointed. With that, I must bid you a very good evening, and of course, happy writing. Ta-ta.